We might have lost the Facebook feed because we are late.
Okay.
T, what do you got for me? Can you see? The YouTube is like maybe the most critical. That should be running.
Um, I don't see it yet on Facebook.
It's running. I see it. It's running.
On Facebook?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Yeah, 'cause I got to notice that. All right. All right. All right. So welcome everyone. Good morning. This is another session of Spill the Tea. We're a couple sessions already. This morning we have health coach, master coach Terri Haas with us, who's going to be speaking about the carnivore diet. Since we're running late, I'm going to cut the intro short. One of the crucial things, it seems, with all the people that I've ever met in this space that have leadership roles and are trying to help people, have stories. For me, I reversed diabetes a couple of years ago on the ketogenic diet, and without going on too long about that, the challenges I had to find my way to that answer were quite substantial, and it upset me to the point where I was inspired to jump into this area with both feet and devote my life now. And T is a part of that. Tanner is a part of that, to helping people reverse these conditions. T, do you want to say anything quickly about your background?
I think we should go ahead and get started. My background is basically I've been doing the ketogenic lifestyle now a little less than Dad, so about 2 years. I know it's helped me, and we found out yesterday a lot of why it helped me. So I'm excited to learn more about the carnivore diet and everything. So I kind of want to jump in.
All right. So Terri, like I said, everybody in this space seems to have a story. So maybe you could start by telling us your version. I mean, what is your story? How did you get where you are today?
Sure, I'd love to. My story actually starts out as a small child. And I say that in kind of coordination with the carnivore diet and how it led me there. I was one of those children that didn't ever like vegetables. A lot of you maybe can relate. But I never liked vegetables. And to this day, I still don't like vegetables. So it basically started there. And if you fast forward to, I guess I was about 28. I started having migraine at 28 years old, and had those for about 20 years. So fast forward to about 49 years old. And that was when I found, I actually joined a migraine group for these migraines. And it was the first self-help group or anything that I'd ever dug into. I had never really gone to the doctor for my migraines. My father suffered from migraines, so I really didn't think that there was anything that I could do to help them. He just suffered, no medications or anything like that. So I joined a migraine women's support group, and a lady in there by the name of Katie Payne. Thank you, Katie. She's the one that found Angela's group, and she said, "This is really crazy. This is just, I've never seen anything like this." And myself, like I said, had never gone to any doctors. I hadn't looked for any modalities to help with my migraine. I just thought I was going to have to suffer the rest of my life, 3 and 4 days in the dark in pain, right? Tanner. I joined the group, and at that time, this was June in 2015. And at that time, Angela Stanton had her first book, and it was just a small little thin book, and it was really just a journey of her migraine, how she got migraine and how she decided to dig into migraine, how she quit her job and quit her job so she could study that. And so I read the book in one day. It was a very small book, not compared to the one that she has now. And what I found was I had been in the gym for about 10, 12 years, whatever, and I had been drinking twice as much water that I need for my body weight, and I never used salt. So growing up, we did eat full fat in our family, but my mom always bought fat-free milk. I guess my dad was raised on that, so that's what we drank. But everything else was full fat. we didn't really eat a lot of carbs in the family. I mean, it was a standard American diet, but back in the 60s, right? I'm 55, so it wasn't quite as bad as it is now. Like pasta was not a thing when I was growing up. Pasta became a thing when I went to college back in the 80s. So we didn't have a lot of pasta, but we always had meat, fat, a salad and that kind of thing. So when I joined Angela's, and I never used salt. She never used salt. That was back in the 80s, right? 70s. And so salt was bad kind of at that point. So when I joined her group, so I was never using salt and drinking too much water, and I halved all of that, went down to my body weight in water and started using salt. And I literally never had a migraine since. So I have not had one migraine since I joined in June 2015. But I had a lot of things going for me before that I subsequently learned later, as her research has gone on over the last 6 years, why and what I had done, bucked the system basically, that helped me heal faster than a lot of the migraineurs that joined the group. And that was because I stuck to hating vegetables and loving my beef and dairy. So while everybody was getting chicken salads and whatnot, I just basically said, I'm having a double cheeseburger with bacon and avocado, and I'm going to take off the bun, the lettuce, and the tomato, and I'll have fries because that's a vegetable, right? And so that's kind of how I started, started kind of in that regard or whatever with carnivore. And another thing that I learned or watched an Oprah show back in the 80s, I think maybe it's early 90s, she had a show on called The French Paradox. And that was about how the French eat full fat foods, and they eat so little of it, and they eat to satiety or whatever, satiety, and you don't need to eat a whole lot. So at that time, this was very interesting for me. I had gotten overweight from the birth of my second child. I was very heavy, about 50 pounds. And so I joined Weight Watchers, and I did really well. But then I got to a plateau. And when I saw this show, is right when I was at my plateau, and it said, eat full fat. And at this time, I was eating some low-fat stuff. So I said, you know what? I'm going to just try this. The last 12 pounds melted off, and I thought, I'm going to stick with full fat as long as I live, because I know the truth now. So segue back to the migraine group, whatever, and that's a low-carb, high-fat protocol. And when Angela opened up her keto group, and she started her research there, one of the things that she taught there, I learned from her there, was how vegetables really are not our friends. And so I was like, guess who's totally gone from my diet now? I'm not eating salads anymore. I'm not eating anything if it's not good for me, and we can get by with it. And that was also when I learned that carbs are non-essential. And so I basically took myself to what we coined in the group a hyper carnivore diet. I segue between like keto, low carb, high fat, and then what we call, like I said, hyper carnivore. And then sometimes I do eat higher carbs too, just depending. But with you all, I'm sure you've seen eating higher carbs on a ketogenic diet, you can feel that insulin and the glucose and the low blood sugars and the hypoglycemic events that any higher carbs can bring, right? So so basically that's my story. So really just have settled into finding that carbs, fiber, plant foods, and I just don't get along. So I just let them grow and be pretty, and they let me be happy eating carnivore.
That's amazing.
Yes, it is.
So here's the question. Here's the question that I have. How do you make a decision? So I've been ketogenic now for a couple of years, and I rigorously measure my bloods every single morning. I practice what I preach to my clients. So I'm monitoring my ketones and my blood glucose every single morning, plus my weight, and in addition to that, my blood pressure. So let's talk about transitions here. So with the carnivore, I imagine, and this is where I'm going to need you to jump in and teach me about this. but I imagine that you are in ketosis because you have reduced the carbs to such a degree in that lifestyle. And I'm wondering about the amount of protein. What is the comparison, right? Because I do run high protein for the ketogenic diet because like you, I'm athletic, right? I'm CrossFit athlete and I'm working out most days. There's few days during the week where I'm not doing something. So
Right.
how do you make the transition? Was it based solely on the fact that you were having bad reactions to plant material? How does one out there, I know we have at least one person on our show right now who is carnivore. How do you make the decision to go there?
So there are several factors that would be involved in making the decision to cross over from keto to carnivore. And I think a big one would be taking a look at, say, and any autoimmune conditions you may have or autoimmune reactions that you may have to plants, fiber, that sort of thing.
How do you tell them? Like you're talking about autoimmune, right? But I think that some of the listeners might not. I get that term, but I
Sure.
think they might not. So like, give me an example of a plant that you eat where you have an autoimmune reaction. What does that look like?
So I guess you wouldn't pinpoint necessarily a single or singular plant. It would be plant kingdom, I guess we could
Right.
basically put it in. So I guess if you're going to say, let's just say you come from a standard American diet, we'll just kind of start there. And if you're interested, then the first segue typically would be moving to a low carb, high fat diet, right? So you're going to eliminate added sugars, you're going to eliminate added sweeteners, I should say, grains, because those are extremely damaging. Those are the first thing that needs to go. Seed oils, and then starches as well, correct?
Right.
So once you eliminate all of those, you're going to have a lot of healing. I mean, you're going to have miraculous, you're not even going to understand the depth, and the breadth of healing that's going to occur just from removing those from your diet. And that can actually, you can ride that for quite a long time before you may even see or notice anything that will affect you later on, once you kind of clean the slate, get that cleaned, then that will also allow things to come to the surface that you didn't even know were there before. So you're settled into low carb, high fat, and you're noticing mood swings or mood instability. You're still not feeling your best, say, right? And so you are piqued a little bit in your interest and know that maybe just from reading in the low carb, high fat communities, you're seeing keto, you're seeing the words carnivore, you're seeing just a little bit further dietary wise that you could take it, or health wise that you could take it to help yourself. So you would then maybe look into going into the ketogenic diet. You don't necessarily have to move to the ketogenic diet to be carnivore. They're not necessarily the same. You aren't necessarily in ketosis when you're eating carnivore. It really depends on insulin or your insulin resistance, or the state of your insulin health. So once you start eliminating even more and more foods, again, like when you move to SAD, from SAD to low carb, high fat, and then from low carb, high fat to keto, or whatever, you will still see these residual symptoms that don't seem to clear up. And I think at that time would be when you would want to look into eliminating further foods from your diet to help alleviate any health situations that are still occurring.
So like one thing that I've noticed is that on the keto diet is that dairy can affect me. And it's a variable thing, right? There's some hard cheeses that have no effect, but there are others. I just bought one from Costco, as an example, and I had some of it like 3 or 4 afternoons ago, and basically, the gas started right away, and then I had the runs. I mean, but there's other hard cheeses that don't seem to have to have that effect. And I've also noticed with heavy cream, which I like to have in my coffee, that if I go over a tablespoon of it in 1 cup, that I have that kind of reaction. So I stay to a tablespoon and I don't have any problems. But I'm wondering about the plant foods in particular, because I know that when I'm not a carnivore. Occasionally I move in that direction, like when my wife's out of town or whatever, like over the weekend, she was out of town and I mainly just had a steak along with just a couple pieces of zucchini for my dinner and no salad at all. Right. So occasionally I'll move in that direction. But I know that when I moved to the ketogenic diet from the standard American diet, that my inflammation dropped immediately. Right.
Yes.
Like I just felt better overall. And after workouts in particular, I didn't feel like I was all swollen up anymore. In any case, that was a benefit. So for some people, is it a situation where that inflammation continues and they actually have to drop out certain plant foods? Like, which plant foods do you think are most problematic, or do they need to go? Just going to use the term. Do they need to go naked? Do they just need to go with the total carnivore? How do you coach this? I guess for somebody who is experiencing this level of inflammation.
So the recommendation would be to jump 100% all in. And that is because really you're dealing with two different gut bacteria and two different types of nutrition, whereas one is going to be have carbs, and so there's going to be glucose in there, correct, from the carbs, plant matter, I should say, not necessarily glucose, because you're going to have glucose from protein as well. Excuse me?
Oh, I'm sorry. We have someone else that just joined us. Kareen, if you could mute yourself, that would be great.
Pod to work either.
So what happens is in a diet that's based with it contains plant foods, you're going to have a gut bacteria or gut microbiome that's very different than one that does not contain plant foods. And just as you said, with the gas and the air and the upsetting of the microbiome there, you're going to have, some digestive issues. So the recommendation I have is to jump all the way in so that you can set that gut bacteria up in a situation where it does not have any plant foods and the fiber doesn't, interfere or whatever. And that's kind of one of the things that can also keep you on a carnivore diet until you're can keep you on a carnivore diet too. I know if I eat a little bit of plant foods, a very little bit, I can tell. I feel it in my gut, whereas I'm normally don't feel any movement or anything in my abdomen or my intestines. Definitely once I eat plant foods, I can feel a little gurgling in there. Bathroom activity definitely gets a little different. So I say jump all the way in. And to your point about dairy, I guess, so one thing that I've noticed too, or that I've found in my studies, is using A2 dairy. Are you familiar with that? Have you heard of that before?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so humans evolved on A2 dairy. This is actually human milk. Breast milk is A2, and so is some cow's milk, not all cow's milk. Goat's milk is, sheep's milk is, knack milk, camel milk, buffalo, water buffalo milk is. So I don't know, maybe 10, 20,000 years ago, I don't know the exact date, but all cows used to be A2 dairy, or A2 protein, I suppose. There was some sort of mutation, and then now most cows are A1, A2. So as I said earlier, from my studies, humans evolved on A2 milk. So if you're drinking A1 milk, which is mostly sold in the stores, you're going to have some reactions to that. It's the proteins in that. So it'll basically cause what's, people term lactose intolerant. So you have bloating, stomach discomfort and whatnot. And moving to A2 can alleviate all of that. Unfortunately, here in the US, it's a little difficult to find all dairy products that are A2, but you can find A2 brand milk is out there, and your local dairy, you can ask them, your local farmers. There are some other brands that are A2 as well. Some states, you're lucky enough to have some A2 heavy whipping cream and cheeses as well. It's becoming a little bit more mainstream. So that'll really help. Another thing that's great that you will notice that will help when you move to a carnivore diet. So it's not necessarily autoimmune, but a thing called oxalates. Are you familiar with that term?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you move from low carb, high fat to a ketogenic diet, typically then your intake of high oxalate foods increases. Kale, spinach, nuts and seeds, those are really high keto foods. I'm grain free and flour free, so I don't do any dirty keto or anything like that. And you asked me earlier, yes, I am in ketosis. I measure my blood sugar, my blood ketones. I was in ketosis actually before I joined Angela's migraine group unknowingly, and I learned all about ketosis through her, as well as in my studies through Nutrition Network, where I met you on your post the other day, Peter. So a lot of keto people use almond flour, which is very concentrated almonds. I mean, you think of almonds, which are one of the highest oxalate foods. And so if you're shredding those down or grinding those down, you're having a great deal of almonds in one small batch of cooking, whatever. So that's a great reason to eliminate those types of foods from your ketogenic diet or move to a carnivore diet. So getting rid of all of the anti-nutrients, all of the anti-foods from your diet, 100%, the ultimate elimination diet, which is the carnivore diet. It's all meat, seafood, seaweed, dairy, eggs, and mushrooms.
So we've been rolling now about a half an hour, and so I want to put out to the people that have joined us. Do you guys have any questions for Terri? Maybe you can just in the chat you can say yes or whatever, and then we can bring you in. Any questions about the carnivore? Anything special? If you're thinking about this right now and you're not sure or you're nervous, I have another question for Terri. How do we modulate salt intake? Because I know for the clients that I work with, when they shift to the ketogenic diet, that we have to increase the salt. So for my clients, I recommend that they be between 10 to 12 grams of table salt every day in order to get that 5 grams of sodium. And I know that if you don't modulate the salt, that more or less you're going to feel crappy pretty quickly going into the ketogenic diet. And I would imagine, how is it for the carnivores? I would imagine this is a similar situation.
Very much so. Your salt intake is going to be pretty much the same on a carnivore diet as it would be on a keto diet. You don't have the carbs in the mix, and so you will. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Salt to taste is what I recommend my clients, and then a little bit of additional salt first thing in the morning when you wake up, and maybe last thing as you go to sleep, since at night our brains are the busiest doing their housekeeping, and this will help keep the brain calm at night and help you sleep during the evening. But I don't have a target or a set amount of salt that I recommend. Everyone's individual. For instance, I myself have a condition called hyperhidrosis, and it's a form of dysautonomia. It's an excessive sweating disorder. I have not yet tapped into that. That is my next thing. Is like, I'm going to figure this out. It is not additional salt. It's not B1. I haven't figured that out or whatever. But so I really just work with everyone individually, because there are some that don't need as much salt as others, and I don't want to create a situation where we have oversalted, because then it's all, you're in disequilibrium in that manner. So.
Sorry, I had muted myself. Yeah, so I agree with you. I think there's a gradient on salt, and I think as far as myself that I'm on the upper end of that thing.
Yes, yes.
I
will
feel
say
like
too.
I've sorted out, how much table salt I need every day, but I still am occasionally running into the muscle cramp thing at night. I'm trying to get the magnesium aspect of this worked out, and I'm not even sure where that fits in. But one thing I do know is that it almost doesn't matter what magnesium supplement I take. And it doesn't matter the type either, whether it's magnesium citrate or magnesium oxide, any of that business, right? If I get too much, then I'm on the toilet.
Well, lucky for me, I'm actually allergic to magnesium supplementation, which is really interesting. So this all, turns into, again, kind of segues back to Angela's protocol, whatever. So, she has her protocol, and she has everybody take a certain amount of salt and certain types and certain amount of magnesium in a specific way for migraineurs. Magnesium for us migraineurs is excitatory. So she recommends we take this before 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And when I started the group, I started taking the magnesium supplements, and I broke out in hives. And so I tried it, and this was before she had the types that she has now, but I probably tried 10, 12 different types, and every one of them I break out in hives. And my magnesium shows okay, on my blood work, but that doesn't necessarily mean, reaching us real time, whatever. So even magnesium supplementation isn't something that I will recommend to everybody, because not everybody can take it. I'm, my N equals 1 here, there's not many of us, but there is me. And I know for salt intake for me, so when I first started, never ever using salt, I required a lot of salt. I was just like you, probably 10, 12, maybe 13 grams of salt a day. It felt like I was just, tossing salt right and left every time I turned around. And so a year later in 2016, when I joined the keto group and really got into measuring my ketones and my blood sugar, and getting into nutritional ketosis, my salt definitely even increased then. But what I've found over the years, since my insulin has been stabilized and isn't really wonky or anything too much anymore, I don't require as much salt as I did in the beginning. Not nearly as much. I'm maybe down to half-ish, not quite half-ish of the salt requirements that I first needed. And I find that kind of odd. But I don't need it.
T, jump in, because I'm not showing these questions. You're going to have to go for it on your end.
Okay, so we have a couple questions. The first one, I'm going to read them both just because the second one, desiccated organ supplement. I had to read that a couple times, Colin. I was like, wait a second, is that a thing? Okay, so do you have any experience with uric acid gout on the carnivore diet? Uric acid, gout?
I myself do not have any personal experience with that, but I have worked with people that do have that and have reversed and healed that. And what's really interesting with gout, so what I learned in my studies at Nutrition Network with gout is going in and out of ketosis can actually cause a gout flare. I don't know exactly the mechanics why. That's a little bit above my scope of practice, whatever. I just didn't need to go there, whatever. So, but I did learn that. I thought that was quite fascinating. And so you want to either remain in ketosis or remain out of ketosis, or have to deal with the flare from what I told you, going in and out. It's the fructose that is the problem with gout, so it's not necessarily a uric acid type of thing. It's the fructose. So if you really remove that, that should settle down. And then, like I said, sticking in or out of ketosis, because I believe it's the transition that is will cause the flare.
Yeah, I'm wondering if a state of inflammation and high uric acid together end up with a high probability of the gout attack. And I totally agree with you on the in and the out thing, because I think that, well, when we talk about the migraine thing, I know that if you are compliant with the ketogenic diet, right, and then you go out and you eat a bunch of carbs, I mean, you can very easily bring a migraine back, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
you have a similar thing with the gout, because a certain percentage of us out there, including I'm in this group, we run high uric acid. In fact, this morning, my uric acid is 8.2, and yesterday morning it was 9.4. So my average right now runs at the top of the and Pete and I we're friends, and we are exchanging this information in our Facebook group all the time. So we're running right, between 8 and 9 every day. So I think that if I went out and ate a bunch of carbs right now and came out of ketosis, I think I would be risking a gout attack. And then, as I learned in the Grand Canyon the other day, for other reasons, I could be risking a migraine too.
Right.
Well,
Go ahead,
Go.
Tina.
No, that's just what I found interesting yesterday, is because I mean, I stick pretty strict to the ketogenic lifestyle, but I don't do it, to reverse. I haven't done it, I don't have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, so I do it for more preventative reasons. But like sometimes, if I go out with friends or something, I'm like, okay, I can have a little bit of ice cream, Dad. I'm guilty of that. Don't get me wrong. But I notice when that happens, the next day, that's initially when I feel like, and if you were listening yesterday, I kind of have like if I can feel like a headache coming on or a migraine, I have like a heart palpitation thing that happens. And it's like a shoot of adrenaline. And I'm like, okay, this is bad, because I can feel kind of when a headache is going to come on. So that's kind of either be in ketosis or not. But it seems like if I had carb heavy food, such as ice cream, or something along the lines of that, that's when I would get a headache. So that was one of the things I thought was really interesting, is either in or out. And it seems like it's the same for a lot of serious issues, which I didn't even, yesterday connect all the dots to mine.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, though, you don't necessarily have to be in ketosis to be migraine free. You don't have to be in ketosis to be autoimmune free. You don't have to be in ketosis for these issues to be resolved or feel better from them. Ketosis isn't the necessary goal for these to be healed. Really, it would be the foods that you do put in your body, and then and I don't really want to get too strict with macros, but the macros of those foods that you do put in your body. So
keeping the carbs low.
Keeping the carbs low, but again, not necessarily low enough to be in ketosis. You can be low carb and high fat and heal some of these things, but really, to get the best benefit would be to move to the carnivore diet, to remove all the carbs. And there are different macros that you will use in the carnivore diet that will lend itself to keep you in ketosis or keep you out of ketosis. And those would be dependent on your state of insulin or medications that you are on. A lot of medications are contraindicated in ketosis. They're not safe to take in ketosis. So you want to keep someone out of ketosis by keeping their macros at the higher protein end versus the higher fat end. So there's ways to mitigate that as well.
Which is a good segue to Colin's question. Terri, do you use desiccated organ supplements?
I do not, but I am a proponent of them, and I do not simply because I eat liver whenever my body craves liver. I eat oysters whenever my body craves oysters, and this is something I've always done. Similar to how I listen to my body. When I said I don't want chicken salad, I like beef and cheese. I'm going to do that. So that had served me well. And so I've just decided I'm going to go ahead and keep with that intuition. Even before I found the low carb, high fat ketogenic lifestyle, I would do the same thing. So whenever I craved oysters, and it kind of seems to be seasonal almost, I'm craving them now. I've had them twice in the last week, as a matter of fact. I had them last night for dinner. So I just figured that I have some sort of need for zinc, and so my body craves oysters. And I do the same thing with liver. I don't eat liver on a regular basis. I don't include it in my diet once a week or anything. But every so often, every few months, I get a hankering for liver, and so I make up some liver pate, and I'll either eat it by the gobs on a spoon, or I'll have some carbs and slide it on a piece of celery or something like that, and then think, oh, carbs, fiber, but I can't have a cracker, so.
I'm laughing at the liver. I hate liver. I do not like liver.
I love it. I never liked liver growing up. My mother never cooked liver growing up. And then one day I was out at a restaurant, and I don't know what happened, and I ate it with a ton of onions. And ever since then, it's been one of my favorites.
I feel like it's something that like an acquired taste. Like it could, like when I first started keto, I didn't like chicharrones, like pork rinds at all.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I like really have acquired a taste for them. So now I can't get enough of them. I'm like constantly eating them.
Yes.
That's interesting. Liver.
Start with chicken livers. They're sweeter. So what I do is fry them up in a little bit of butter, and then puree them with heavy cream and butter, and then I put a little onion in there too. That's not necessarily carnivore, but it's hyper carnivore or whatever, and tastes really good that way.
Okay, I'm gonna try that and let you know what
I'll send you my recipe. And you need to join the migraine group. It's all in there too, and you've got a lot in store for you when you join there.
Yeah, I need to do that today, because that was just one of those things that was just I don't know, so interesting. In the carnivore diet, specifically removing migraines like completely, I thought was also just super interesting.
Yes.
Again, I'm still probably a little mind blown at that connecting, like the connecting of the
and
dots.
you really haven't, if you've not joined the group, and your dad can vouch for this, it is even beyond what you think. You will have a real schooling in there. We call it Stanton University after Angela Stanton. So,
that's awesome.
It really is.
We have another question from Pete. I love liver, but I'm scared of it because of the high purine in the gout. Yeah, so I think here's the thing. I think time is our ally, because I know that it was a year. It was a year for me on keto before I saw my uric acid drop from being like in the 10s and 11s every day. On average, like between 9 and 11 every day. So 10, I guess, was my average, to my new average, which is between 7 and 9, right? And now, you guys will all see where I'm coming from with this now. But now I've developed a taste for liver. In fact, the last 2 mornings in a row, I've fried up chicken liver, which is my go-to liver, and salt and pepper and tahini on it. Not tahini. Some people misunderstood. I mean tahini. All right, the Mexican spice with the lemon,
good stuff.
Peel in it and whatnot. And then I fry up my eggs, and I put those down on top of the liver, and then I eat that all mixed up together, and I'm loving it. And actually, I've tested that exact meal with my blood. So I've tracked my blood glucose, ketones, and uric acid before the meal, and then after the meal. And you do see the uric acid come up a little bit in my case. And I don't mean spiking to the stars, right? I mean up a unit or two. And then within an hour or two after the meal, dropping back down to whatever my baseline is that day. So, and I realize on the internet and with the medical establishment, they're like, don't eat this meat, don't eat that meat, and I have yet to find something that I eat that does what they say it's going to do. You know what I mean, Peter? Like I eat an oyster, for example, and oh my God, my uric acid's 14. No, I haven't seen that. what do I see? Yeah, I see a general rise of uric acid after eating something. And then it by the late afternoon, it's dropped back down to whatever my baseline is for that day. And sometimes I still see some high values. Once in a while, I think it was last week, I had like 10.5 or an 11. And honestly, when I looked at the why, I honestly don't think it was the food. The fact is, what I'm seeing now in myself is when I do an intense workout, I know after our recent session with Andre Obradovic, I know that we shouldn't do this, but there's times when I go outside and mentally I'm just like, and I kill myself in an exercise. The next day, my uric acid was up. I mean,
Interesting.
yeah, of course, like you said, Terry, it was an N1 and anecdotal. I'm not sure, but that's what I see when I'm tracking, right? Is this maybe it's the biggest effect that I have on uric acid that I see in myself is when I do a high intensity exercise, right? That seems to have the biggest effect on my uric acid. But it's important to say that after 2 years now, over 2 years on a ketogenic eating platform, that I've not had a serious gout attack like the way life was before this. So
Sure.
anyway,
I've never tracked my uric acid. I think that would be something I think I would like to even start tracking just to see what mine is and what it does, based on a daily thing, my daily activities, my daily intake. Earlier you had said something about keeping your protein high. So what type of macros do you need in a day yourself, or how much protein are you eating? How many grams of protein do you eat a day, or meat?
well, I approach the whole how much and what should you be eating a different way than calculating macros, right? I know that our approach, the one that Tanner and I take, is different than most of the people out there that are calculating macros. So we operate off of a plate.
Okay.
And we break the plate into 3 sections. And the amount of protein that I'm eating is nowadays, in the beginning, it was the size of a deck of cards, or I would say for some people, if they're pretty active and whatnot, the size of an overstuffed men's wallet, right?
Okay.
And so if you're going to calculate for me, it's going to be, I am running now on the high end. And what do I mean by that? So if we were going to calculate it, it would be 2 grams of protein. That's where I'm at per kilogram of body weight, right?
Okay.
And then critically, I'm splitting that into, nowadays I'm only eating 2 meals. So when I work with a client, I like to just keep things qualitative. And there's another question by Colin. I wanted to let you answer it first,
Okay.
before I go. So I don't, if I answered your question, and I realize there's this macro thing versus the intuitive method that
Sure.
we use. And I'm flexible. If I have a client that really wants to go down that trail, then I can do it. Why do I push back against that? Because there's a lot of people out there that do 2 things. They start calculating the macros, and I know that you know the difference here. I'll stop talking in a minute. You can jump in. But you've got about a 20% error in a nutrition label, and then the nutrition, the Fat Secrets and the other apps are bringing that error into the way they calculate. Like if you go on any of those and you search for an avocado, you're going to get the phone book.
Right.
There's going to be a whole bunch of different macros for the avocado, and you're looking at this going, all right, what the heck avocado am I going to calculate my macros off of? You got to choose, right? And then the other thing that they tend to do very quickly is shift to calculating nets. And remember, I work with mainly type 2 diabetics trying to reverse that condition. And I have to be honest at this point that every single one of my type 2s who have gone down the road of calculating the macros are overeating carbs every single day, because they're on the nets. They're using these 20%, the 20% error that gets compounded, And then it's a very difficult conversation to have with them going, okay, can we stop with the macro thing?
Right.
Let's just go back to the net and let's be testing blood rigorously, the glucose and the ketones. And in the case of the gout people, the uric acid, right? And that's so going with Clubhouse. I am Dr. Pete, and I'm going to stop talking now. And Terri, go for it, and then maybe segue into Colin's question.
Okay. And so what was the question? What are we segueing into?
Okay, no, it's no worries. So, okay, the question is, which I'm also interested in this just because of like learning what you do and being a migrainer and everything. So questions for all. Is it necessary on the keto carnivore diet to be testing blood glucose / ketones daily? And then is it because there's a concern of something not going right on the diet / need to have constant data for your body? So, and then for me, I have a question too for you is with that, if you do test your blood and glucose, do you test it every day or do you test it how frequent do you?
So the recommendation I would suggest to get a blood ketone and blood glucose monitor. I think these values give you such insight to what's going on, and you can use them and reflect back on, say, the foods that you've eaten and just see how they affect your blood glucose and your ketones, right? They can tell you if you have low blood sugar or high blood sugar. They can tell you if you've got what is called runaway ketones. There's a little bit of difference here coming as a migrainer. Migraineurs are wholly and unequivocally 100% different than non-migraineurs, especially in ketosis or on a ketogenic diet. It is very easy for us to get into ketosis, and it is very difficult for us to get out of ketosis, whereas non-migraineurs can take a while to get into ketosis, and they can kind of fluctuate in and out. Like, it almost seems as if migraineurs' bodies really, truly prefer to run on ketones. So, and we have a very different set of experiences in the ketogenic diet. We have things like runaway ketones, not necessarily ketoacidosis that type 1s would have, but we can get into a situation where we will have low blood glucose or high blood glucose, and then our ketones back up. So we're not accessing blood sugar either way, right? We don't have any source of fuel. Glucose is either low or high, and ketones are backing up. So I would suggest to measure a couple of times every day, at least in the beginning, until you're kind of solidly in ketosis, or you can have a sense of where your ketones are and your blood sugar is during the day. Randomly during the day, not necessarily the same times every day. I wouldn't suggest fasting blood glucose because that's not necessarily indicative of your state of glucose and ketones during the day. And you're wanting to look for blood glucose 70 to 99, and the use of ketones in the blood would be like 0.5 to 1.5, 1.7. That'll indicate the usage of ketones. Anything over that, and it's a backing up, a weighting of sorts, not necessarily a using. And anything lower, obviously, are just baseline ketones that basically everybody makes, and not necessarily mean you're in ketosis using ketones as fuel or fat adapted. You can eat protein high enough in addition with carbs if you're on a ketogenic diet that can keep you out of ketosis. A certain, over a certain amount of protein in your diet will turn to glucose and keep you out of ketosis. So it's kind of a fine line for how much protein you will eat and that you can remain in ketosis.
Yeah, that's interesting because I found that fish can throw me out of ketosis really easily. Like salmon.
There's no fat in it.
I found that out pretty quickly because I'd had, and even still, like if I have a salmon dinner, I can feel myself. I have to be really cautious with how much salmon I'm eating. But like beef and everything, I don't have a problem with. It's like, steaks, hamburgers, even ground turkey, I don't have an issue with, but it's like anything fish. I like.
Well, what's really interesting. So I'm glad you brought up this point, because so when I first started the ketogenic diet, and I really truly wasn't really keto so much, I was hyper carnivore from the start. And by hyper carnivore is a small amount of carbs. And when you're eating some carbs, some plant foods, and you're eating dairy, then you're going to call it a ketogenic diet because there's plant foods in there. So you count your carbs then. So I was eating ketogenic, but really it's a kind of a hyper carnivore. So, and then moving over to the carnivore diet, and you're eating all sorts of meats, all the chicken, all whatever, all the animals, whatever. And then slowly, as you found out, say you have chicken one night for dinner and you don't feel so great. And you don't quite know why, because you're like, well, I've had chicken wings a million times. These are great, And so you notice it the next time you eat it. And so what I did is kind of stopped eating chicken so much. And then the same thing happened with fish. And then the same thing happened with lamb. And then all of a sudden, what I found myself eating every single day and craving every single day is beef. And and that kind of goes back to the amino acid profile that makes up animals and meat. And when you look, beef is the most highest complete amino acid profile out there. And chicken and fish don't quite, meet those amino acid profiles and leave you wanting more. And I've found the same. I found the same in my work with most everybody that moves to carnivore. They get all excited and eat all the meats, and all of a sudden it's like we're down to beef. And it seems very restricting, but it really isn't. I mean, it's just like every day I'm like, oh, steak time, steak and cheese time. And I eat being in ketosis and being as lean as I am, I have to make sure that I get enough fat in my diet because I don't have a whole lot of body fat to use my own fat as fuel. So, just piling in the fat helps me a lot. But the steak, yes, is very satiating. So I'm glad you brought that point up.
Yeah, that's one thing I really noticed because, I really like red meat in general. And I've kind of found myself I'll have salmon every once in a while, but I can't eat it as much because I know it will throw me either out of ketosis or in a really low state of ketosis. And my body just I'll wake up with that, I feel hungover sometimes. You know what I mean? Where you eat something and you just kind of feel
you're just lacking from nutrients. Sure. If you're going to have fish, or if you're going to have other proteins, especially since you're in ketosis, add a bunch of fat. That will help. But you're still you just get down to this base need, and it just simply is beef. That's what almost all carnivores seem to fall back to.
And then Collins, go for it, Pete.
Can I jump in and say something?
Sure.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of food for thought. My wife and I are both on keto. Mm-hmm. And the only way my wife is able to get into what we call a therapeutic level of GKI ketosis. Mm-hmm. For my wife, she has to really take a lot of MCT oils, for example. Mm-hmm. Myself, because I also keep a food journal and a journal of my uric acid and everything else, just like Dr. Pate. He inspired me to do that. I find that if I drop below 10 grams of carbs per day, my GKI ketosis jumps up. I go into the therapeutic I don't take MCT oil or anything like that.
Okay.
But then if I do allow myself to go into a therapeutic level of ketosis, my uric acid also rides up right away.
Okay.
But if I keep myself in the, like this morning, in the nutritional ketosis level, mm-hmm. 0.6, 0.7, maybe to 1 or something like that, my uric acid drops down.
Interesting.
And the other thing I might want to say, just food for thought, I suffered with allergies for many, many years. Mm-hmm. Just seasonal allergies. Did I say food allergies? I'm sorry, I'm thinking food here, but seasonal allergies. I suffered with seasonal allergies for many years, usually March and April. seasonal allergies went away, I started getting migraines. I was a migraine sufferer for a few years also. Wake up in the morning and wondered, okay, am I going to have a good day or a bad day? And then suddenly you get the floaties going when you're taking a shower, and all hell broke loose.
Mm-hmm.
That went away. The gout came. So seasonal allergies went away. Migraines, I started suffering from migraines. I haven't had migraines in 20 years, but when the migraines went away, then I started suffering with gout. And they say people change every 7 years, and so there's the old saying. I've always wondered about that, but it's only seasonal. March and April is when I used to have seasonal allergies. March and April is when I used to suffer with migraines. The whole rest of the year I was fine. And now March and April is when I have my crutches out for the gout.
That's really interesting. Okay, so I know from my studies and also from my own experience, grains are the cause of seasonal allergies. So removing grains, and if you've moved to the ketogenic diet, obviously you're not going to be eating grains, so that will have your allergies go away. I wonder what it is. So now you've really got me curious about testing uric acid. Yeah. So I'm really definitely going to be doing this, because I moved to Texas back in 1989, and we're huge for seasonal allergies here. We have, yellow snow. The pollen just gets so thick as in snow. It's going on right now. And I have never developed seasonal allergies. I don't know why. Now I know why. I believe it's because I stuck to eating beef and didn't eat. Yes, don't get me wrong. I mean, I ate a standard American diet for the most part, but it was more heavily carnivore, right? So I think it's because I didn't eat so many grains. I ate grains, but whatever. So that's the only thing I can think of. I wonder, I don't know the correlation between the spring and allergies and that sort of thing that would raise your uric acid. That's really interesting. That is fascinating. I'm going to start testing that.
Could it be an autoimmune situation? And that's why I'm wondering with the carnivore. I'm really thinking of jumping into a carnivore diet to try it out, at least temperatures to try it out and see what happens. Sure. But then I think about the fact that when I do reduce my carbs a lot, which is almost like a ketovore, right?
Yeah.
And I go into that therapeutic level, but I've also noticed my uric acid that does go up a little bit higher. Doesn't mean I necessarily get flare-ups, but I do notice my uric acid goes into the 10s when I'm in the therapeutic level. So I know that if I go carnivore, most likely I'm going to be a very high ketosis, maybe just temporarily. I don't know, but
how much protein do you eat a day? Because I wonder if there's a correlation in there, with the amount of protein intake in your uric acid. So I'm wondering if perhaps you're eating too much protein than you actually need at this time. If you're in ketosis, you don't necessarily need that much protein. You can reduce your protein and increase your fat intake.
Yeah, so that's another thing that I'm completely lost right now, as I mentioned to Dr. Pete. Yesterday, for example, I had 141 grams of protein.
Okay.
Which I've been playing with different things, but
how much fat did you have with that?
I'm sorry?
How much fat did you have in your day yesterday, just out of curiosity?
139 grams.
Okay. So, and how many carbs?
I did go a little bit over. I had 23 grams of carbs.
That's not over. So what I hear right here, what I would say is I would think that perhaps you are eating too much protein. That looks to be about 50-50 in your protein fat.
Yeah.
And perhaps you could go a little bit less in your protein and a little bit higher in your fat, and just play with that and see what that does for your uric acid numbers.
Okay.
What do your when you say therapeutic level ketones, do you just mean that your ketones are higher than normal? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. So if I'm looking here my keto or my readings, but for example, moderate. Here's a therapeutic to share with you. My glucose is usually pretty good, between 70s and 80s.
Okay.
But if I cut back on my carbs like I did a few days ago, my ketones go right up in 2.4.
Okay.
So like,
Okay.
This is what I used to see too in my first year. My average ketones every single morning
yeah,
were centered on 2, maybe
Okay.
a little bit less, upwards of 2.5. And if I had a big exercise day the day before, even sometimes into the mid 3s, right? But then a year into it, I saw a shift down. Now my ketones are centered on 1. I can be a little less than 1 this morning. I think, what did I say? I think this morning I'm at, 1.7.
and
Okay.
I'm not chasing ketones by no means. I mean,
Right.
I feel better. I guess I should share that I've lost 65 pounds in the last 5.5 months. So I was
Congratulations.
obese. Thank you. So I know, as Dr. Pete mentioned, it takes time for the body to recover from 30 years of damage. And that goes back to Tanner. If you only knew how lucky you are to have a father who's so involved with that.
Yes.
Because had I known this 34 years ago, I'd be living
Oh.
to be 100. Now I'm not so sure you will live to be 100.
That's the goal.
Congratulations. I know you don't know me, but your father, I'm sure, is very proud of you, and
Yes.
it's very good that. And I'm so happy that the new generation is catching up with this. My whole family is getting on keto, and now I'm dwelling into the carnivore also to try it out. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that. So when you said aiming for higher ketones, that isn't necessarily something to aim for.
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not aiming. No.
Yeah, and for those that think that you would want to aim for high ketones, that isn't necessarily the goal. And again, ketosis isn't necessarily the goal that that one needs to have. Ketosis is great to help with healing of things when you can get to a point of fasting and get to autophagy and get cell renewal and all that type of thing. But once you get past, say, higher ketone levels, say like 1.7-ish, you're really not using those ketones. They're just really waiting in your blood or building up in your blood. So that's not necessarily a desirable thing. It's not a bad thing either. But there is the relationship between glucose and insulin and ketones that work together synergistically, right? And your protein, carb, and fat intake affects those 3 things. So and if you're talking about moving to a carnivore diet, initially you would want to start out with, say, a 50-50. Perhaps since you've already had your migraines cleared up, you may find that you need to have a higher protein level initially. It would really depend on the state of your insulin at this point, and that would be determined by taking some blood ketone, blood glucose measurements, kind of a somewhat of a craft in situ test is how we can base insulin.
And you're definitely right when you say that. You got to be very, especially for me, and I'm sure Dr. Pete too. We got to be very careful not getting out of ketosis. I feel great. I mean, yeah.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I do know that when I see, like this morning, I saw my reading at 0.5 and then 0.6 in the morning. But the morning I tend to be lighter on keto.
Yeah.
But when I see myself low like that, and I call that low, I know right away, hey, buddy, stay off the carbs today, because or else tomorrow you're in trouble.
Yes, that's a good
Pressures come
motivator
out.
to stay on track for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I also think that I think actually after the talk yesterday with Dr. Stanton, I feel even more strongly about this than I have before. That we're in, for those of us that are suffering metabolically.
Oh,
the
yes.
point of the point of ketosis is to know that we've got the carbs low enough, and to remember that, like in particular with gout sufferers, we don't really know why our uric acid is high, and the medical establishment hasn't helped us with that at all. I mean, they tend to jump towards pathology. They're like, okay, well, there's something wrong with you, and that could be true. I mean, maybe I have kidney damage, but what I want to just bullet point out here is that for those of us, I'm 62, and I had 60 years of a high carbohydrate diet that clearly damaged my system. And we're talking about multiple organs here: probably the brain, the liver, the pancreas, the kidneys, and so on in a global sense. And not all of those things are going to recover in the first couple of months on a ketogenic diet, right? I saw my blood sugar stabilize, or blood glucose. I use the sugar thing all the time because of the lay term, but the blood glucose stabilization, A1C. Okay, well, that's all well and good. I can say, okay, I reversed my diabetes, but what about these other factors like the uric acid issue and what about the brain issues, which take really a long time to ascertain whether anything, what kind of stuff could have happened with that,
Right.
down the road, the dementia thing and Alzheimer's and all that. But anyway, we've been at it now for a little bit over an hour, so it's time to be respectful of everyone's time. It's time to bring this to a close. Terri, do you have anything that you want to add or summarize? Any questions you want to ask? I don't mean to me, but I mean to the group, to the people out there, to leave them with food for thought. What are you thinking?
I would just say that if you are really struggling with any sort of issues and your health is not what you would like it to be, to go ahead and give the carnivore diet a try, a thought, and see if it resonates with you. It cannot hurt. It is the ultimate healing diet, the ultimate elimination diet. It is how humans evolved. It is how we got here today. It is how our brains got to be as big as they are and how we are able to think. I invite you to and encourage you to try, especially if you hate vegetables. This will absolutely be something that you love. I guarantee it.
All right. Well, I would like to thank you very much, Terri, for coming on our show and as a master coach and talking about the carnivore. I've learned a lot this morning. I hope that our viewers have learned a lot, and hopefully we can do this again at some point. I'll make sure to put your contact information in in the discussion part of our YouTube channel there, and we can provide you with the MP4 either via Dropbox or with WeTransfer. But that probably won't happen today. It'll probably be. But the link for the YouTube will be available right away today.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pete. Thank you, Tanner.
You.
Thank you, Peter. I look forward to seeing you both in the group and working with you both there and outside the group as well. Thank you for your time, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye, everybody.